Peace, love and life, family. It's your girl Morgan Renee Myers tuning in with another reading of For Freedom's Sake, the story of Fannie Lou Hamer, the life of Fannie Lou Hamer by Chana Lee. My whole purpose of sitting in this particular spot was because I thought I was going to give y'all some garden action. We got a bunch of sage and mint and stuff growing back there, but I couldn't get a good angle and I was starting to get frustrated. And I was like, this ain't supposed to be a frustrating process. I just came to read. So I'll do other videos showing the garden, but I was trying to get some of that action while I read. Also, I'm sitting in this position. I was doing some, I wouldn't say yoga, but I was doing some stretching this morning. I was like, I should, this is a great way to work on my flexibility and stretching. So I should do this like while I'm reading instead of just sitting, under the shade. Because I sit a lot anyway, especially when I crochet. So, alright, so I had started reading chapter 2 yesterday, and then I started cramping, and my neighbor was mowing his yard. There was a lot going on. So I'm going to pick up where I left off. We were talking about how Fannie Lou got introduced to SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, when they came to Ruleville, Mississippi, and how she was already kind of prominent in her community because she helped, I forgot what the job was called, but pretty much when people came with their bales of cotton and things like that, because they still were sharecropping, she would make sure that they got, fair amount of money for their cotton and stuff, because the white men would always find a way to discredit them for their work. So she was already known in the community. So when SNCC came and they were not aware that they had the right to register to vote, and they were taking a bus trip. 18 of them decided to take a bus trip to go register to vote in another city where the KKK and white supremacists were known to have meetings and things like that. So that's kind of where we were at. They only let them come in 2 at a time. So I'll read the last paragraph before I stopped. So Hamer and Davis entered and provided their full names. The registrar then directed them to answer 21 more questions on their place of employment, employer, place of residence, and even the date of the application itself. Forewarned, Hamer and the others knew very well that this information will be turned over to the hostile White Citizens Council, which was the white supremacist group. But they provided the information despite the life-threatening risk involved. Hamer and the others had come to understand the significance of SNCC's presence. They knew that the organizational or structural opportunities for change had presented themselves. Thus, they sought to take full advantage of this brief period in their lives, and Hamer's presence as the leader seemed to motivate the delegation to stand firm. So she pretty much was like inspirational and helped other people get on board. Hey David, it's story time. After Hamer and Davis provided the requested personal information, Campbell administered a literacy test. Campbell was one of the white people they got in touch with when they first came in. Campbell administered a literacy test, a test that Hamer described as being rough. To be sure, the source of such roughness was in no small way attributable to the ominous spectacle of rifle-carrying whites strolling in and out the courthouse as the prospective registrants were being examined. In such a difficult environment, the registrar instructed examinees to read, copy, and interpret sections of Mississippi state constitution so that he could determine literacy. Now, y'all know good and damn well white people that was registering to vote ain't have to do all this bullshit. Okay, I'll be getting upset, honey. Okay, hold on. Hamer's portion of the exam required that she read and interpret Section 16 of the state constitution, a section that dealt with de facto laws. Later, Hamer recalled that this was her first exposure to the actual contents of Mississippi's state constitution. A lot of us don't know our state's constitution. She thought she could certainly copy it, but interpreting it was out of the question. By her own admission, she knew as much about the de facto law as a horse knew about Christmas Day. But as quickly as she resigned herself to failure on this first attempt, she had also quietly resolved that she would return as many times as it took until she passed. This was a typical Hamer response during her early movement years. Obstruction seemed to make her feel even more strongly about the moral correctness and necessity of her actions. Oddly enough, in this respect, racist resistance did just as much to define her character as did her own initiative and popular appeal. I like that, because a lot of us would just give up on the first try. Not saying that, we want to be assimilated to this oppressive system or all this and that, but she did not let it deter her. Okay, well, you're gonna keep seeing me, I'm gonna keep coming back, which is beautiful. Okay, all right. So after flunking the test but surviving what she simply referred to as an ordeal, she and the others walked back toward the bus and climbed aboard in anticipation of the late afternoon trip back to Ruleville. Oh, so I guess they didn't let the other 16 go if those two did, if she couldn't get through. After flunking the test but surviving what she simply referred to as an ordeal, she and the others walked back toward the bus and climbed aboard in anticipation of the late afternoon trip back to Ruleville. But just as the group began boarding, Hamer noticed a state highway patrolman driving back and forth by the vehicle. The bus drove off, but it was only a matter of a few miles and brief minutes before this same law enforcement official, accompanied by a local policeman, confronted the group with the consequences of its actions. As the bus crossed a bridge leading out of Indianola, the highway patrolman, flanked by the additional officers, flagged it down and directed the driver to come to a halt. The officers then ordered all passengers off the bus. Everyone left the bus and began singing "Have a Little Talk with Jesus." The officers ordered them back on the bus and demanded that the driver return to Indianola, where he was fined $100 for operating a bus of the wrong color, and then threatened with arrest because he did not have the money. The bus was a very bright yellow, and the officer claimed that it could have been mistaken for a school bus. However, the same vehicle had never been stopped when it was used to transport migrant cotton workers out of state. When it appeared that the driver would be taken to jail, the 18 passengers decided that he should not go alone, although many of them, including Hamer, still did not quite understand what was going on. "We didn't know what it was all about, but we know we should stick with him because he carried us down there," Hamer recalled. Loyalty to someone who had taken a significant risk in the voter registration effort played a major part in the group's decision to stick by its driver. In addition, the riders simply did not have $100 among them. Their choice to unite behind the driver in this moment of individual persecution netted an unexpected result that seemingly gave all parties involved a safe and relatively convenient way out of a potentially dangerous situation. When it looked as if the entire group would offer to be arrested too, the officer, apparently not wanting to attract any civil rights attention or to deal with the hassle of having such a large group on his hands, in light of the earlier scene at the courthouse, reduced the fine to $30, which the 18 passengers gathered up and paid collectively. Asshole. Susan Kling identifies this incident as a significant turning point, a stage in Hamer's personal fight in racism. I think Susan Kling was another person that has done a biography on Hamer, because she has different notes in here, so that if I were to go to the back of the book, I could see which text she got that from. So yeah, and I feel like she's mentioned her name earlier in the writing. So Susan Kling identifies this incident as a significant turning point, a stage in Hamer's personal fight against racism. Beginning with the Indianola experience, Hamer moved from being an individual whose sole means of resistance was survival to being one who took initiatives to promote collective struggle for real power. As she began resisting on a different level during her SNCC years and later, the stakes and positive consequences grew in direct proportion. When she would place a counterbalance on the scale as a corrective to the planters' outright cheating. Okay, so let me slow down. So as she began resisting on a different level during her SNCC years and after, the stakes and positive consequences grew in direct proportion. When she would place a counterbalance on the scale as a corrective to the planters' outright cheating, and when she countered other, more devious ways of depriving tenant farmers, she went beyond simply resisting for herself. Her actions increasingly had larger consequences, if only because more people were benefiting from them. So that's the part where I was talking about earlier in the book. It's mentioned that, the people in her community that sharecrop, when they say counterbalance, they were pretty much coming like weighted cotton. And the tool that was used, the white planters, they were cheating the people out of their money pretty much. That it wasn't like measuring it correctly or something like that. So she would come and have her own little weight that she would put on it to make it, make it more fair, and would end up providing them more money. And I don't think she did it for everybody, because that would have been obvious. Like, wait a minute, I usually don't pay these niggas this much. But yeah, so she was already like well known in her community for being that type of person. Some shit I would have done to look out for my people. Okay. All right. So her actions increasingly had larger consequences, if only because more people were benefiting from them. However, from another perspective, Indianola was not the beginning of Hamer's real trouble. It was a replay of the injustices with which she had grown up. But now Hamer was encountering injustice in a new form, juridical. They don't say judicial, they say juridical. Maybe it meant judicial, I don't know. Juridical, which complemented the outright physical violence and theft characteristic of both her earlier and later years. This new experience with injustice resulted from Hamer's effort to realize empowerment on different terms, precisely through exercising her right to the franchise. There was much that was significant about Indianola. Hamer was introduced to new possibilities via the vote, which at that point she saw as having great potential for making her life better. Although she knew that the process would not be easily achieved. She was a 44-year-old woman who was familiar with the racist ways of most white Mississippians, although she was constantly amazed at the lengths to which some would go to keep blacks powerless. On another level, the Indianola experience helped Hamer realize the strength in numbers for community action. Let me read that again. Because hell, the shit we going through now, all it takes is strength in numbers, honey. They can't do it to us all. Yeah, it's going to be some sacrifice. Yeah, some of us going to get shot up, tased, tear gas. Some shit going to go down. Some people going to perish. But when there's numbers of us, when we are in droves, and I'm not just talking about protesting and rioting in the streets. I'm talking about when we're utilizing our black dollars wisely. When we, look, I'm about to go on a little rant. When we get out of this individualistic, materialistic, consumerism mindset that we have, and we start focusing more on ourselves, knowing ourselves, and also looking out for our immediate family and our community. Now, I get it. You ain't always close with blood. I totally get that. I, myself, do not have the connection that I would like, or I feel like I should have had with my family, and maybe it's on either side of my family, my mom or father's, and maybe it's for good reason. Some of the people I start to learn and know about, they don't sound like people I want in my aura. But nonetheless, your either immediate family, your tribe, your close friends, your community. Once we get out of this consumerism, individualistic, materialistic mindset, we can do and provide so much more for ourselves. It is nothing for us to come together and to live amongst each other, to help provide for one another. Half the shit that we buy from each other are really services that could be bartered and traded. You need child care. So I be watching people toddlers. And because one, I don't agree with how much daycares cost. Two, these people don't want to just leave their children with anybody. They want them to be with people that they trust, that's going to follow their dietary restrictions. One of the babies I watch is vegan. So you need people. So I'm damn near not charging that much. And some people will look at that as, oh, you don't know your worth, this and this and that. We're community. We're family. For real, that shouldn't even be something we pay for, because it take a village. And also, I shouldn't be the only one that can offer these types of services. Now, the way my life is set up, I'm a businesswoman, so I get money in various ways. So it's not hurting me to charge as little as I do for that. But also, it's out of love. Like, every time I see this child, I don't need to be compensated for them, because they're community. This child is going to grow up, and we're going to instill in them the things that we feel we need to instill in them so that they can be the best version of their highest self and do what they came here to do. So I say all that to say, when it mentioned strength in numbers, had those people not said that they was going to willing to go to jail with him, anything could have happened to that man. Anything could have been hung up on the tree before the night ended. And not to say that all them policemen wouldn't have did something to all them people that got off that bus, but it's just something about the power in numbers. It's something about a power of when we stick together. So for me, a lifestyle is not impossible. Yes, every time we try to build something up, the government try to come tear it down because they know our power as a people and what unification does. They know how that will drain their pockets dry. But for me, my ideal world is living communally. If not in the same house, we have land that we own that's on the same street or vicinity, so that it's not so difficult for us to get in touch with each other. It's not so difficult for us to travel and see each other and check up on each other. That we can garden and farm together, raise our own food. For those that still want to eat meat, have your own little goats and chickens and cows and shit, and kill that and do that shit yourself. All the things that we are buying that are just unnecessary, stop buying the shit. Like, why are we buying stuff that really, like, we're so, this pleasure principle that we have as Americans, like, we just, everything just we want stuff to feel good. Like, I have a big issue with, like, I understand money is really energy, currency is energy, but I still be getting caught up in, like, just when we waste money on what I feel like is stupid stuff. We have so much wealth within our community that it could be utilized in different, more positive, beneficial ways. So I'm gonna get back to the book, but Chap, agreed. I've been speaking this in my shop and on my page. Yes, King, tell them people in that barber shop. Maybe, it'll spark something in somebody. They might not change today, but you never know what type of seed you plant. As I drink my coconut water. It's power in numbers, y'all. Okay, so back to the book. So, on another level, the Indianola experience helped Hamer realize the strength in numbers for community action. For Hamer, the Indianola 18 was now a collective, an easily identifiable unit of folk bound by common concerns and committed to certain political objectives. And Hamer had a distinctive place in the collective entity, not simply because of her long-standing membership in the Ruleville community, but also because she had begun seeing herself as embodying the potential for both justice and empowerment. By leading the group up to the courthouse and deciding to enter first, Hamer performed an act of leadership that others in the group were expected to follow. Coming out of the fields and boldly walking into a courthouse was unimaginable for these individuals before August 31st, 1962. In this regard, the Indianola voter registration attempt was anything but an insignificant gesture. In 1960, blacks comprised more than 61% of the voting age population in Sunflower County, yet they only made up 1.2% of registered voters. Half of them didn't even know they could register to vote. They still thought, it was a law that they couldn't. So see how information don't be getting to us? We can be a self-sustained community. Yes, we can, sister. You pronounce your name Sasha Campbell? Yes. And I am loving your page. Oh my goodness. Yes, we can definitely be a sustainable community. And I don't care for, a lot of people be trying to bash, oh, well, we don't do this and we can't do this. And every time they come in and tear it down, da, 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 da. No. All that means is we gotta tighten up on our security. We gotta tighten up on our tactics. I love you back, sis. We gotta tighten up on our tactics. Nothing is impossible. We are a powerful people, and once we continue to know ourselves, that's why I always be speaking on. I'm still working my way there, but that's why I always speak on the things that we put in our body. Y'all saw some of the stuff I posted today with some song lyrics, the things we listen to, the food that we're eating, the things that we're drinking. I'm definitely still not there, but I am elevating on a daily basis. And so I understand how hard it is to unlearn and relearn and to detox and to get rid of these taste buds and parasites. I totally get it, but it is not impossible. And we can definitely be self-sustainable. And so when people say, oh, well, where's the people? Ain't nobody out. There are. I've had to check people recently. Like, there are. Me and my tribe, we are totally out here. Soul Society, y'all see me post about them all the time. Support, opportunity, unity, and leadership. Those brothers have done so much for my life in the past 3 years of me knowing them and the community around me. They're not even from my city. They're from Jacksonville, North Carolina, country boys that both went off to college, had different experiences. Neither one of them graduated, but they are making powerful, impactful moves in the city of Greensboro and North Carolina and across America and the world in general. They've I'm not too big, I don't be hype off celebrities, but they've interviewed many people either in person or on Instagram. David Banner has come out to our city twice for different events that we have, the We Are the Goal experience. Recently they've interviewed people such as what's his name, Wise Intellect, Professor Griff, what's the brother that was in Hidden Colors, Baba Chana or Kaba, I can't think of his name right now, but the light-skinned brother with the long hair and the goatee that be in Hidden Colors. Moo Fresh, Sonny Patterson. They've interviewed people on mental health. And then we do community work. We set up events. I helped run a music summer camp with them about 3 years ago with some of the youth. So, and then we're talking, we're networking. We know people that have access and understand real estate and different things like that. So all we got to do is pull all these gifts and talents together. Myself currently, I save business cards. I have notebooks full, and me and my roommate have been discussing putting together a black business directory. Have others already been started? Yes, but for the sake of me having all this information and me being who I am in my community, Soul Society awarded me, they made up this award. I was trying to go on a spiritual journey and leave, and it was a lot going on in 2017. And they came up with some award and gave it to me called the Gate City Gatekeeper Award, which pretty much just means I'm from Greensboro, North Carolina. We're known as the Gate City. I'm very well connected out here. And I just do a lot, and I network a lot of people. I connect a lot of people. So I take that, I guess that title or that gift, that seed that they sowed in me into heart. And I really like to utilize that and what it is that I do. So all it is just connecting these different people. So that's why I like to have family dinners where we're eating plant-based meals, so that you can try something new, so that you can network and meet somebody different, so that you can stop saying that we're not out here doing these things or what black people need to do, because we're doing it. You just need to know yourself, hop on board, stop being distracted, stop being consumed with stuff outside of you. If this time period hasn't shown us anything else, we need to be tuned in. We need to be paying attention, and we need to be putting in action. And I'm going to stop right there. Sasha said, facts. We need to reshape our reality by reshaping our subconscious. Honor where you're at, sis. Gotta go. Keep doing your work. Yes. Peace, peace, peace. Okay, awesome. So back to the book, honey. See, books like this be setting me off, yo. And it's important. I'm an educator, so this is something I would definitely go back and take notes and type out a little blurb about and discuss with students, discuss with teenagers and youth and adults. I actually have a mentor. She has these book studies called Know Thyself. She's having one today, actually. It's going to be outside in her backyard. I think I should go to that. It's at 3 p.m. And it's just her and her elder friends. And we usually have a book that we're reading, and she types up different sentences or excerpts from it, and we just discuss it. So I usually never have the book, that they're reading. And so those sheets are helpful. And she used to be a social studies teacher for me when I was in high school through the Upper Brown program. So I really value her, and I like the system that she got, and I'm taking notes and going to follow in her footsteps. Okay, so pretty much in 1960s, blacks comprised more than 61% of the voting age population in Sunflower County, yet they made up only 1.2% of registered voters. The act in Indianola was much more than a group of poor, disenfranchised black Southerners going up against a rigid system of exclusion to exercise a constitutional right. It also represented a significant psychological transformation. Local folk, led by the Indianola 18, were now beginning to believe that they had it in their power to change what had been seen as hopelessly unalterable. So sometimes it takes those people in your community, those leaders, those people that step forth and take action to inspire other people to not be afraid of themselves and to step up and to speak out. And that's beautiful. Certainly, the mass meeting in Ruleville figured prominently in this transformation. The music, the enthusiastic appeals of the youth, of the young, predominantly SNCC-led groups. For others, this transformation went beyond the introduction of a method of action around which they could imagine a new future. More fundamentally, it may have led some to believe that they deserve better. Such a transformation for Hamer began early with the teachings of her mother, who insisted that her daughter learn to love and value herself in spite of messages to the contrary from the outside world. Certainly, this aspect of her personal history eased her transition into leadership for the movement. That's beautiful. So having parents that instill in you that you are great and awesome and powerful, and you carry that with you, as opposed to being hurt that you're dumb or you're stupid or you just go to school to learn shit and your parents barely talk to you, makes a world of difference in your self-confidence. And I noticed that with kids in my community, the parents that are really involved and super intentional with their children, you can really see them excelling, and their brain power and the things they say and think are really quite amazing, as opposed to kids that are kind of just ruled by technology and parents, barely paying them any type of attention. Like, it's a whole different energy. As Hamer's political work picked up steam after her first registration attempt at Indianola, so did the harassment. In fact, Indianola marked the beginning of a series of politically motivated but ultimately unsuccessful attacks on Hamer's life and livelihood. It seemed that with each new attack or threat of attack, Hamer resisted with stronger force and deeper commitment to the cause. This was one quality of her leadership that would soon convince others to join the fight. After the group finally made its way out of Indianola and arrived back in Ruleville, the bus driver dropped everyone off at the church. A fellow Ruleville citizen, the Reverend Jeff Summers, drove Hamer 4 miles to the plantation where she had been living, or as Hamer would make a point of saying, existing, for the past 18 years. Coming home, Hamer was met by her daughter, Dorothy, and her husband's cousin. As June Jordan put it, it was only a matter of minutes before trouble fell into Hamer's life like a hammer smashing on her head. Her children quickly informed her that the plantation owner, W.D. Marlowe, was blazing mad and raising sand and had left a message for her either to go back to the courthouse and withdraw her voter registration application or leave the plantation. Now, that's ridiculous. Why the hell would I drive back to Indianola just to withdraw my voter registration? Why can't I vote? We're not slaves no more. The hell is wrong with these people? Hey, everybody. This book pissing me off. Okay, so W.D. Marlowe was blazing mad and raising sand and had left a message for her to either go back to the courthouse and withdraw her voter registration application or to leave the plantation. Bent on breaking her spirit. Now, plantation, she's not a slave. They were sharecroppers, so they still lived on plantations. They still farmed. Pretty much doing everything they was doing as slaves, except now they got a little bit of portion of it, but it still was they still was cheating the hell out of them. The plantation owners would definitely get way more of the crops and wasn't doing none of the work. This man told her to go withdraw her voter registration or leave the plantation. Bent on breaking her spirit and weakening her will, the landowner also warned that her husband, Pat, was not to go with his wife if she decided to leave, or else they would lose all of the furniture, and Pat will find himself looking for another job as well. Damn, so she would have to just leave the plantation and her husband would have to stay? What? Bent on breaking her spirit and weakening her will, the landowner also warned that her husband, Pat, was not to go with his wife if she decided to leave, or else they would lose all of their furniture and Pat will find himself looking for another job. This is ridiculous. What was the last incident that happened in this book? Her and her husband had accumulated some cows and stuff, or was this her when she was growing up? I can't remember if it was her and her husband or her mom and dad. I think it was her mom and dad. They had acquired, it was when she was a kid. They had acquired some cows and stuff, and some white man came and tried to start some shit with them, and they wasn't standing for it, and in the middle of the night they came and put poison in the troughs where the animals ate out of, and their stomachs got big and they died and shit. Lord have mercy. These people are really detestable. Okay, so lose their furniture and Pat will find himself looking for another job as well. Hamer listened without responding as her daughters relayed Marlowe's message. She then entered the house where she sat down on the girls' bed. Meanwhile, Pat remained outside. No sooner had Fannie Lou walked inside than Marlowe arrived, demanding to know whether his message had been passed along. Marlowe asked Pat, "So did you tell her what I said?" Pat replied with a stiff, "Yes, sir." Marlowe added swiftly, "I mean that she got to go back and withdraw her registration or she'll have to leave." Hamer, overhearing the exchange between Pap and Marlo, got up from the bed and stepped outside. Just as Marlo noticed her presence, he asked, "Did Pap tell you what I said?" Hamer replied calmly, "Yes, sir, he did." Evidently unable to restrain the paternalistic impulse within, Marlo continued, "Well, I mean that you are going to have to tell me whether you are going back and withdraw your registration application or you going to have to leave here. We're not going to have this in Mississippi and you will have to withdraw. I'm looking for your answer, yay or nay." Bitch, don't rush me, first of all. For a moment, Hamer simply stared at him. Marlo then added, "I'll give you until tomorrow morning, and if you don't withdraw, you will have to leave." Beyond the political significance of his effort to keep tenant farmers disenfranchised, Hamer was struck on a more personal level by the selfishness of Marlo's reaction. She thought to herself, what does he really care about us? I had been working there for 18 years. I had baked cakes and sent them overseas to him during the war. I had nursed his family, cleaned his house, stayed with his kids. I had handled his time book and his payroll, yet he wanted me out. It was almost as if she expected him to put aside momentarily the racist constraints and customs of Jim Crow Mississippi. She was offended that he did not have the decency and consideration to try to understand how she might have wanted to do something, anything, to better her own condition. In spite of the very humane way she had acted toward him, Marlo could not bring himself to accept her need to do something for herself. Having had about as much as she could take from Marlo, Hamer declared a commitment to herself. "I made up my mind. I was grown and I was tired." In a 1968 interview about her showdown with Marlo, Hamer recalled her final response. "Mr. D, I didn't go down there to register for you. I went down there to register for myself." She did not wait around to see what would happen the next morning, and with the aid of Andrew Young and James Bevel of the SCLC, she moved out that night, leaving home and family for the freedom to act in her own best interest. Well, all right now, sister. It is not entirely clear whether Hamer had any doubts or fears about leaving at that particular moment. I'm sure she did. Nobody wants to just uproot from their home. But also, I like how, some people would say, well, pride and ego. But no, like, she's been watching this man's family, taking care of him, sending him damn shit while he at war across seas. And you have the audacity to tell me because I want to register to vote because my life as a black person in Mississippi is... Woo! That I have to make a decision to leave? Come on, bruh. I don't want to stay nowhere where I already wasn't wanted, but you are showing me to my face with your actions based on something I'm doing for myself and my people that you really don't give about me. I wouldn't want to stay there no way. So yeah, she probably did have some doubts and fears about leaving at that particular moment. So it's not certainly clear whether she had doubts, fears, or whether she revised her memories later on. Her 1968 recollection of this moment leaves the impression that she left with little regret or hesitation, which was probably not entirely the case, given that leaving meant separation and difficult times for her family. Pap had to stay on until the end of the harvesting season, apparently to ensure himself against any more labor losses. W.D. Marlo gave every indication that he would make good on his threat to take the couple's furniture and car. Although Hamer made a decision to leave her home, family, and job, there was simply no way Pap could leave in light of the family's fragile economic position. That position would now become even more desperate since the family would be without Fannie Lou's contribution, because she did a lot. Even though Pap stayed on the plantation after Hamer departed, Marlo was content that he had gotten the best of the Hamers. To add insult to injury, he fired Pap anyway at the end of the harvest and confiscated the furniture and car, for which he was still claiming the family owned on outstanding debt of $300. Child. I'm going to have to sage after reading this book. Hamer's decision to leave that night was probably not easy for her to make or her family to accept. In Hamer's case, as a plantation timekeeper, she was giving up one of the most desired positions for black plantation workers. It was a unique position that allowed her a certain degree of leverage and control over her own destiny, as well as that of her family and co-workers. Although a plantation timekeeper was not above exploiting or being exploited, she or he did have a status with the white landowner slightly above that of a typical sharecropper. her. But irrespective of Hamer's relatively privileged station as a timekeeper, leaving was difficult because she also had no clear idea where she would find her next source of income or how long this search would take. Although Marlowe framed his ultimatum as a choice between two options, Hamer's departure was anything but an exercise in free will. In leaving that night, she merely anticipated what would surely follow the next morning, and perhaps wisely so in light of the persecution she soon faced. Hamer left her home, husband, and children to stay with friends in Ruleville. She first went to the home of neighbors, Mary and Robert Tucker, who were known for housing voter registration activists. The Tucker home was only one of several places where Hamer sought refuge. Everywhere she went, violence followed. It was only a matter of days before Hamer, in attempting to realize the most basic of constitutional rights, was subjected to drive-by shootings, Mississippi style, politically motivated, pointed in intent, and indiscriminate in consequence. Wow. A reign of terror was touched off in the small town of Ruleville after the first wave of SNCC-led voter registration attempts, and Hamer emerged as a leading target for persecution. On September 10th, 1963, that's my daddy's birthday. Or was he born in 64? I think it was 63. Okay, Daddy. 10 days after her eviction from the plantation, 16 bullets were fired into the Tucker home, fortunately missing all human targets. Oh, my God. So not only did she have to leave this plantation and her family, she's going to stay with friends. And Everton Briggs, I think that's that workout coach I met in Maryland when I used to live there. Wow. What's up? Anyways, not only did she have to leave her family, but wherever she went, she was a target. So it's like you're bringing danger to your friends' homes. So that has to be a difficult time to have lived in. Few people were naive enough to regard this shooting and Hamer's recent move as coincidental. It was apparent to many Ruleville inhabitants that a group of white supremacists was after Hamer, the new troublemaker on the block, in the eyes of many self-appointed guardians of Jim Crow. The Indianola visit, as well as SNCC's activities throughout other parts of the Delta, was stirring up much controversy in the small town of Ruleville, and Hamer, as well as a few of her local co-workers, came to symbolize that trouble in the minds of those determined to preserve the old order. What? Hamer, as well as a few of her co-workers, came to symbolize that trouble in the minds of those determined to preserve the old order. The same night that the Tucker house was targeted, shots were fired into the home of Herman and Hattie Sisson, critically wounding two young Jackson State women students sitting near a window. 20-year-old Marilyn Burks received gunshot blasts to the head and neck. Oh my God. And 18-year-old Vivian Hillett sustained bullet wounds to the arms and legs. Although Hamer suspected the shots were intended for her, there was certainly enough evidence to suggest that the shots were also meant for Hattie Sisson, who, like Hamer, had become a target after her widely publicized voter registration attempt some 2 weeks before Hamer's own attempt. That same evening, night riders fired into the home of Joe McDonald, reportedly one of the very few active black registered voters in all of Sunflower County. When the McDonalds heard the initial gunfire, they all jumped into the bathtub where they remained until the firing ended. Everyone in the McDonald household escaped injury. Oh my goodness. Throughout her time on the run, Hamer received much-needed charitable support from Ruleville citizens, oftentimes across class boundaries. For example, Hamer had food to eat in large part due to the admirable efforts of some black school teachers sympathetic to her plight. Hamer had now become a virtual fugitive in her own hometown. She stayed with friends and family here and there. She tried to elude those who diligently sought to eliminate her politically and physically. Ultimately, she and her husband decided that it would be best that she leave Ruleville altogether. This decision was prompted by a very curious scene in the Marlowe plantation office that Pap observed and immediately felt compelled to act on. A little more than a week after the initial retaliation on Hamer, he casually strolled into the plantation maintenance shop and noticed some buckshot shells with plastic covers sitting on top of the table. Immediately, he grew suspicious and hurried out to the Tucker's home where his wife apparently was staying that night. Pap told Hamer what he had seen in the shop and suggested he would take her out to their niece's place in Casilla, located in Tallahatchie County, just northeast of Sunflower. His fears were anything but unfounded. Hamer remembered that he reasoned to her, "I believe something going to happen because a man don't buy no buckshot shells this early in the year. You know, not for rabbits or something like this." So Hamer and her 2 adopted girls proceeded to Tallahatchie, where they continued to pick cotton to support themselves. They ended up staying until late October. It appears that in her 2 months in Tallahatchie, Hamer experienced a significant change of heart and attitude. She began reflecting on her conditions when the thought came to her not to run away any longer from what was happening, but to return. This plan was spawned by her ruminations over a fact of American life: racial injustice. One Saturday morning, Hamer arose and began preparing herself to leave the house. Somehow, understanding Hamer was not dressing to go out to work that morning, her niece asked where she was headed. Hamer replied, "Back to Ruleville." Although this announcement rattled the girls, Hamer had done a great deal of reasoning with herself and had concluded that by continuing to lead a life in exile, she was complying with an unjust order which amounted to a slap in the faces of her parents and grandparents. She rejected the notion that she was a criminal who needed to act as if she had done something wrong. When one of her daughters raised the possibility of something happening upon her return, Hamer told them, "But this what you got to look at. I'm not a criminal. I hadn't done one thing to nobody. I went down to register for myself, and I got a right to live in Ruleville because it's people that have done way more things than that. They're still here. They still here, and I'm going back to Ruleville regardless." She was ready to die, boy. Hey, y'all. I am sweating in the sun, honey. It's good, though. It's good vitamin D. I like this confidence and courage she got. But, what part of it is maybe foolishness? What part of it is just standing up for what you believe and not allowing white supremacy to run you out of somewhere you grew up? So I'm going back to Ruleville regardless. In fact, her bold decision to return involved more than her refusal to be treated like a criminal. It also had to do with the familiar theme of economic exploitation. Few unjust conditions enraged Hamer so much as the continued and unacknowledged devaluation of her labor and that of her forebears. It seemed she could not help but see her return as reclaiming the land she had worked and developed, even if this reclamation was more symbolic than real, as turned out to be the case since she could not return directly to Marlowe Plantation. In her explanation to the girls, she added, "My parents helped to make this town and this country what it is today, because it was out of their sweat, tears, and blood that they, white landowners, got as much land that they have here, and I have a right to stay here." Although fearing for their caretaker's life, the girls accompanied Hamer back to Ruleville. This change of heart reflected a variation in Hamer's usual reaction to persecution and harassment. It signaled a moment of transition somewhat akin to a religious conversation. While in Tallahatchie, Hamer had a searching and reflective moment that caused her to resuscitate herself in relation to the world around her. Although Hamer was resolute, very decisive about her part at the Indianola courthouse, she initially trod with caution when she returned to Ruleville. She and Pap concluded that she had gone as far as she could go in testing the limits of racist reaction. By the time she returned from Tallahatchie, however, Hamer had decided that such challenges, however life-threatening, must be met with a steadfast, more principled opposite reaction. Christian faith and emotional memories of her parents and grandparents triggered and bolstered such a transformation. Hamer's return to Ruleville was not permanent, however. No sooner was she reunited with her family than she was informed of a sugar refinery accident involving a male cousin in Chicago. He had been injured in an explosion at Chicago Starch, a plant where finely powdered sugar and other confections were processed. Since she had played a role in his upbringing, Hamer felt a special obligation to assist him in his recovery. So off she went to Chicago the following day, and she remained there for 2 weeks before returning to Ruleville. Hamer stopped again in Tallahatchie County to pick up the rest of her belongings. All right, I'm about to go read up under this umbrella. Y'all come with me. Hold on. Because it is getting a little spicy. Ooh. Okay. Here we go. And I can see y'all better. I couldn't really see. David said, blood, sweat, and tears, they splatter. Ha, the nerve. I have a part in one of my poems called Black Men in America where it says something about 28 or 29 days of concentration. Black lives take more than 28 or 29 days of concentration. We built the nation that enslaved us. That's got to count for something. Like, whether we were already indigenous to this land, whether we was brought over here, we worked this land. This land is ours. They pink asses could not have been out in this sun picking no cotton, picking no plants, doing no harvesting all day, being emotionally abused. They would not have survived. Period. So yes, she had a right to live in her city, her state, without being persecuted. But when you start standing up for yourself, they don't like that. Okay, so, and this might have been a blessing that her cousin got hurt in that plantation, in that Chicago factory, and she had to end up helping him. So during the fall of 1962, Hamer increased her activities in the movement, even though it meant being away from her home base. She attended a SNCC leadership training conference at Fisk University at the invitation of Bob Moses, who dispatched a local activist, Charles McLaurin, to locate her in Tallahatchie and bring her to Nashville. Hamer had been identified by, this is the same Tallahatchie that Chris Brown is from. If this is in Tennessee, Virginia? No, I'm lost. Let me shut up. I know what I'm talking about. All right, so anyways, Bob Moses, who dispatched a local activist, Charles McLaurin, to locate her in Tallahatchie and bring her to Nashville. Hamer had been identified by the organization as the perfect protest for local leadership development after her trip to Indianola. Also, SNCC invited Hamer as a way of tapping into the community of the needy because she had served as a leader on the plantation during her tenure as timekeeper, a position in which she often served as a go-between for black laborers and white bossmen or landowners. Hamer's residence was often an after-work gathering place for members of the community because of her stature, although Pap was not always happy about this. While at the conference, Pap is her husband. While at the conference, Hamer participated in the politics and voting workshop, which addressed the topics of nonviolence, communications, and economics. Although this did not mean that she had no interest in other activities covered by conference sessions, her choice indicated the faith she had in effecting change through voting. When asked on the conference application form why she wished to attend the Institute, Hamer replied, "To find out what I could do in the midst to help free my people." Following the conference, Hamer returned home in December 1962 and continued her voter registration canvassing as a field secretary at large for Mississippi under the sponsorship of COFO. I forgot what all those stood for. They were different organizations. You got SNCC, SCLSC. Let's see. COFO was the Council of Federated Organizations. Then you have the National Urban League, which was NUL, Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, and you also had CORE, Congress of Racial Equality. Okay, so she was a field secretary at large for Mississippi under the sponsorship of COFO. When Hamer reunited with her family for good after spending more than 2 months away from home, she found that peace was still not in store for her. In part, this was so because she wasted little time in going back a second time to register. On December 3rd, the family moved into a new home on Lafayette Street that relatives and friends had helped them to acquire, and on December 4th, the seemingly undaunted Hamer was right back at the Indianola courthouse. In a 1975 interview with Hal Raines, Hamer recalled that before taking the voter registration test for the second time, she proudly declared to the registrar, "Now, you can't have me fired because I'm not living in no white man's house. I'll be here every 30 days until I become a registered voter." Because of the fierce persecution that invariably followed registration attempts, especially in remote areas like the Mississippi Delta, it is unlikely that Hamer made these points in quite the same kind of bold pronouncement that she related in her interview with Raines. They keep mentioning that, this particular author keeps mentioning that certain things that Hamer says in interviews may not be how she actually recollected or how it actually came out in interviews. And I'm not saying that she doesn't have a right to question or discredit, Hamer's retelling of her own story. But it does kind of seemed sketchy or alarming. Knowing the times that they were in and knowing how these white people would just kill you at the drop of a hat is kind of baffling that, like, she succeeded in missing all of these attempts at her life. And if she was this bold and how she stated things, that she didn't just die right on the spot. And then again, the author mentions that we know that she went to the doctor for one thing and ended up coming out with a hysterectomy. But it's mentioned that she may have had some miscarriages before. But she says Fannie never spoke on that publicly or personally in her own autobiography or in interviews. So the way this author writes about her life is kind of like she also just alluding to when Fannie is in interviews, she may not always be speaking the whole truth or remembering the whole thing, how it actually happened. And I don't know how I feel about it, but I just notice it every time it come up. Because it's like, okay, now, sis, you done said it about 3-4 times. Just tell the story. All right. So, on December 3rd, the family moved to a new home on Lafayette Street. The relatives, in a 1975 interview with Hal Raines, Hamer recalled that before taking the voter registration test for the second time, she proudly declared to the registrar, "Now, you can't have me fired because I'm not living in no white man's house. I'll be there every 30 days until I come register." Because of the fierce persecution that invariably followed registration attempts, especially in remote areas like the Mississippi Delta, it is unlikely that Hamer made these points in quite the same kind of bold pronouncement that she related in her interview with Raines. The movement gave its participants a good deal of hope and courage, but rarely did their heady faith or confidence translate into the feeling of invincibility that Hamer's statement seemed to convey. In public and in private, activists were forever mindful of the many life-threatening dangers that lurked nearby. Certainly, this must have been the case for someone with a reputation like Hamer's. Drive-by shootings, threatening letters, and phone calls, in addition to the off-season appearance of buckshot shells, must have touched off some kind of alert in her mind. I don't know if any of y'all have seen Dave Chappelle's comedy. I can't remember which one. If it was the latest one, it might be the latest one. Or the one where he's in a jumpsuit on Netflix. And the only reason I know what these buckshot shells is because he has a joke on there where he talks about he lives, where does Dave live? In like Oklahoma or somewhere country. Ohio. I think that's where he's from and where he lives. And he was talking about how like a white man just was walking across his lawn one day, so he went to Big Lot, Best Buy, some store, and was buying a gun, and they had pictures, and he was asking the guy, and the guy was like, well, this one's buckshot and this one's deer shot, and he was explaining, he was like, well, that one won't kill a man. So that's the only reason I know what buckshot is. Buckshot is the one you really want to take someone out. I think he was saying you could put a hole through a truck with a buckshot bullet. That's interesting. So certainly this must have been the case for someone with a reputation like Hamer's. Drive-by shootings, threatening letters, and phone calls, in addition to the off-season appearance of buckshot shells, must have touched off some kind of alert in her mind. My phone on 50%. It was on 40 when I started. Let's see if it'll let me get through this last few pages. I hope so I don't have to come back with chapter 2. Okay. For this reason, it is difficult to regard her alleged statement to the registrar as an instance of unmitigated timidity. If, in fact, Hamer was fudging the truth in her latter account, this should probably be regarded as one of many instances in which she was crafting an image of herself as the big, bad, strong, and daring black woman. If this is the case, then Hamer, as an historical figure conscious of her own place in public life and history, stands among substantial historical company. Upon Hamer's return visit, the registrar, Cecil Campbell, questioned her on Section 49 of the Mississippi Constitution. Buckshot. That was a funny. I might go watch that later today because this book kind of pissing me off. So upon Hamer's return visit to the registrar, Cecil Campbell questioned her on Section 49 of the Mississippi Constitution, addressing the House of Representatives. There were a number of reasons why Hamer returned with such determination and sense of urgency. One was the sheer indignation she felt at having been denied the precious right to vote. The rage that Hamer felt and open voiced about her deprivation was constant in her life, and it proved to be a powerful source of motivation. The persistence of injustice and her frustratingly painful memories seemed to ignite her rage periodically, causing it to brew and intensify as it did during her exile days in Tallahatchie. Second, it is possible that at this point she was beginning to envision a larger place for herself in the civil rights movement and maybe even in mainstream American politics as well. Most of the local activists who led or encouraged others to make that foray into their respective county courthouses tended to be registered voters themselves. This is not necessarily a SNCC requirement, but it certainly helped one's cause to be a personal example of what could be achieved. Third, Hamer has simply become impatient about determining her own destiny and the destinies of people most like her in matters of race and class. On January 10th, 1963, Hamer returned to the Indianola courthouse expecting to have to take the exam yet a third time. Instead, Hamer learned that she had finally passed. Oddly enough, Hamer attributed her passing partly to preparation on her part. In her interview with Rain, she noted, "I went back then the 10th of January in 1963 and I had become registered. I passed the second one because at the second time I went back on December 4th, I had been studying sections of the Mississippi Constitution, so I know if I got one that was simple enough that I could pass it." Although Hamer and other civil rights activists knew that the outcome of the exam was most often subjective and political, they always held out hope that they could demonstrate enough correct knowledge and be judged objectively. Hence, activists poured a lot of energy into projects like the citizenship schools instituted by the South Carolina activist Septima Clark and attended and taught by figures like Hamer. After registering, Hamer was not able to vote immediately because she did not have the 2 poll tax receipts that were required in Mississippi in order in what? After registering, Hamer was not able to vote immediately because she did not have the 2 poll tax receipts that were required in Mississippi and in other black belt states. One could not qualify as an official elector until these states were paid in consecutive years. What? It was not until May 1964 that Hamer cast her first vote. Despite the legal obstacles and the violence directed against her, Hamer persisted and continued to make her small stands for freedom and justice. In doing so, she would soon become an important symbol of the movement. Because Mississippi law then required that the names of all persons who took the registration test be printed in the local paper for a minimum of 2 weeks, Hamer's victory subjected her family to retaliatory attacks by angry white citizens and law enforcement officers. Such harassment extended to employment. Fannie Lou and Pap were unable to find work. She had definitely overturned the apple cart, and there were plenty of Sunflower County residents who were anxious to remind her of this. By the time Hamer had returned to Ruleville in winter of 1962, the Hamers, with the help of movement friends and Fannie Lou's 6th grade teacher, had established their own permanent home owned by a black woman in Ruleville at 626 East Lafayette Street. Fannie Lou Hamer was able to live there for the rest of her movement years. Even as they moved, however, so did their tormentors. Carloads of white men armed with rifles circled the home constantly, hurling obscenities at Hamer and her family and threatening to shoot them down. If Hamer or one of her family members decided to leave the house, they would be followed by these same cars with the hostile passengers continually threatening and cursing. Hamer received the same threats and obscenities through numerous anonymous phone calls or in abusive letters. As usual, Hamer's response was to continue to work and get our people organized. Before long, things went from badder to worse, as Hamer described this period of retaliation. Excuse me. In addition to the wave of terror, official reprisals steadily regained down on her. State law enforcement officers and Ruleville city officials waged their own relentless campaign to strike fear into the hearts of those who would be so bold as to secure a basic democratic privilege in the franchise. Mississippi law enforcement officials often paid Hamer and her husband unexpected visits at unreasonable hours. Before 4 and 5 o'clock one morning, a group broke into the Hamer house with their guns drawn and billy clubs positioned high in the air, ready to come down on the first body that moved. On one occasion, during the Christmas season, Pap Hamer had gotten up one morning to go to the toilet. No sooner had he turned the light out and walked out the bathroom than he and Fannie Lou heard a knock at the door. As Pap opened the door, in walked Dave Fleming from nearby Drew, Mississippi, a fearless character commonly called the Sundown Kid. a moniker no doubt pinned on him for exploits typical of the one he pulled off that morning at the Hamer's residence. Accompanying him on his mission were a few other white men, including the Ruleville Sheriff S.L. Millam. The sheriff was the brother of J.W. Millam, whose plantation she got kicked off of, the infamous accused murderer. Oh, I'm sorry. That's wrong. They just have J.W. as their initials. He was Marlowe, and this is Millam. So the sheriff was the brother of J.W. Millam, the infamous accused murderer of Emmett Till, the 14-year-old Chicago native whose bloated and badly disfigured body was found in the Tallahatchie River. The intruders asked Pap what he was doing up at such an hour. The crew then searched the Hamer's house with flashlights in one hand and cocked guns in the other. They shined their lights around in every room, including the Hamer bedroom. Fannie Lou Hamer recalled this incident with particular distaste because, among other transgressions, it showed a total disregard for her as a woman. I was in bed, and they didn't know how they would find me as a woman in my house, probably naked as hell. And they flashed the lights around. They had guns in their hands, and they backed out like, we were some kind of criminals. Many times, the Hamers found state-sponsored harassment a much tougher challenge than the isolated but persistent threats of a few mean-spirited individuals. The case of a delinquent water bill was one such incident with the authorities. One day, Hamer had ventured outside to retrieve some water, only to discover that the water line had been turned off. Assuming that it had been turned off by two young boys in the neighborhood who had assisted her in doing this before, Hamer promptly turned the water back on and caught a bucket full. But later, the two boys told Hamer that they had not cut the water off. Hamer thought, oh no, this is some kind of trap. That evening, the mayor, Charles M. Doreau, sent a night watchman out to the Hamer house to deliver a message summoning her to City Hall to talk with him. The next day, Hamer took time away from her political work to comply with the mayor's request. Doreau told Hamer that she was guilty of theft for taking the water because her water bill was delinquent by 2 days. It was due on the 10th of the month, and it was the 12th when she went outside and turned the water on. It is not clear whether Fannie Lou Hamer ever confessed to the charge. Her counter grievance focused on the original source of the problem. The water bill had been for the outrageously high amount of $9,000, supposedly for the consumption of 6,000 gallons of water. Hamer began disputing the bill, saying that there was no way in the world that her family had used 6,000 gallons of water in 1 month. This bill was even more outrageous given that the Hamers had no running water in the house and all the family members spent much of their time away during the daytime hours. The children were in school. Pat was usually out hunting while Hamer would be out in the field canvassing political voters. Having lost her appeal and obviously unable to pay the amount required, Hamer returned home. Soon the law returned in the person of S.L. Millam, this time to take Pat Hamer to jail. Not long after, he was bailed out by Charles McLaurin, and apparently nothing more serious came of the matter. But the absurdity of the entire incident was not lost on Hamer. While retelling this story in a 1968 interview, she remarked, "Now, that's not even funny. When a person drags you down like that, then you know this is really something. Such harassment by Ruleville officials, including excessive telephone and electricity bills, continued throughout Hamer's political career." They just harassing this woman. Hamer certainly was not alone on Mayor Doreau's political hit list. The mayor also played a leading role in harassing the Williams Chapel Missionary Baptist Church by cutting off its free water service and terminating its tax-exempt status because its property was suspected of being used for purposes other than worship services. Soon afterward, U.S. Fidelity and Guarantee mysteriously canceled the church's fire insurance, causing the church to shut down for a time. Doreau also fired city employees suspected of having any association with SNCC and its voter registration activities, and he often interfered with the distribution of federal surplus food to Ruleville citizens. Moreover, as SNCC charged in a telegram to Attorney General Robert Kennedy, Doreau willfully and maliciously beat a 14-year-old Negro youth after warning the young activist, "I'm not going to have that mess or any of that integration stuff." In her autobiography, Hamer described the winter of 1962 as rough. She recalled not having the opportunity to can any food and that Pat was not able to get a job because everyone knew that he was married to Fannie Lou. Because Pat and Fannie Lou Hamer only spoke fondly of one another in interviews, it is difficult to determine what sort of strain their financial hardship placed on their marriage. To be sure, the Hamers' financial woes continue right through their rise to national and international prominence and on until her death. During the early phase of Hamer's political career, her immediate family subsisted mostly on charitable contributions from other family members, friends, and movement organizations, primarily SNCC. The family also received a little federal relief in the form of food stamps and goods from their local welfare office. In a 1963 letter to James Foreman, Hamer asked for $150 because she had to have a phone put in, and something else important, as I get $24.09 a week. Since no one would hire the Hamers and Fannie Lou was not yet on SNCC's payroll at this point, the cash she referred to was probably part of their relief package. On one occasion, however, Hamer absolutely denied receiving public assistance. In a 1969 interview with the Amsterdam News, she stated proudly, "When we had hard times, we refused to go to the welfare department. I would not want my husband to have to leave the home and go through the agony of a guilty conscience." This contradicts the recollection she shared later with John Egerton, as he reports in A Mind to Stay Here. "And on top of all harassment, we didn't even have to work. People brought us food, and we were finally able to get commodities from the welfare office. The man literally threw it at us. Various people and programs met our everyday bills, and SNCC helped a lot." Perhaps what we have here is another instance of Hamer's crafting public/historic image for herself. Uh-oh. Okay, I'm going to end right there because my phone on 5%. I can't even see. Okay, let me turn this brightness up a little bit so I can end the live. Alright, it's 12:33. I only had like a page left, but I'll probably finish that and go straight into chapter 3 the next time I hop on. So thank y'all for tuning in. Hope you learned something. Peace.